The ranch sat heavy under winter's hand, silent except for the long groan of the barn beams and the steady rhythm of hooves stamping in their stalls to keep warm. No birds sang. Even the sky seemed tired, slumped low and gray, burdened with snow not yet ready to fall. Lena Kincaid rose before the sun most days, boots already pulled on by the time the rooster made his pointless noise. Her breath fogged in the lantern light as she passed through the kitchen, bare shelves, ash-cooled stove, a single mug still damp from last night's tea. She moved quiet as water, careful not to wake her father. He hadn't spoken to her in 3 days. Not out of anger, but from something worse, grief turned inward, old and stubborn. Since the fire last spring took part of the east fence and, with it, the last of his savings, he'd been living like a ghost in his own house. Grunts had replaced greetings. Work orders came with a nod or a lifted brow. And in the silence between them, Lena had grown into a woman without anyone noticing. She carried the hay to the barn as she always did, shoulders squared against the wind. The snow crunched beneath her boots, deep enough to chill her calves. When she opened the barn doors, the horses lifted their heads, steam curling from their nostrils like smoke signals in the cold. But it wasn't just horses that stirred in the dark that morning. At first, she thought it was the sack of grain someone had left too close to the wall. Then it shifted. A man, curled into himself near the back stall, half buried in straw and saddle blankets. His hat had slipped low over his face, and his coat looked like it had weathered 2 winters too many. One hand clutched something to his chest, torn canvas, maybe a satchel, and the other hung limp at his side, blue at the fingertips. Lena didn't scream. She rarely did anything loud. Instead, she stepped back slow, like drawing breath might wake him, and lifted her lantern to get a better look. His boots were worn near through. His cheekbones sharp beneath weeks of unshaven stubble. Whoever he wasn't dangerous. Not now. He looked more like something the wind had carried in and forgotten. The horses didn't spook. That told her something. She crouched beside him, pressing 2 fingers against his throat. Faint pulse. Alive, but barely. She considered waking her father, but the man's presence, this mystery, felt like hers alone. Like the universe had dropped a secret into her lap and asked her to keep it warm. She set the lantern near his head and reached for the satchel. Not to steal, just to know. A folded paper peeked from the side. Torn at the edges, water-stained. She opened it carefully, her fingers already aching from the cold. "To my intended bride," it began. Her heart stilled a beat. She read on, lips parting. The letter was written in a firm, careful hand. He explained who he was. Micah Quinn, age 25, a carpenter from back east. He'd answered an advertisement. He'd sent money. He'd waited for word. When none came, he took what he had and traveled west anyway. "I ain't a man of fine words," the letter said, "but I got 2 good hands, a quiet nature, and I don't scare easy. I'm coming, if you'll still have me." There was no return address. No response. Lena folded the letter back, gently as if it were glass. She looked down at the man again. Micah. A name now. A story. A soul wrapped in snow and silence. She dragged the spare horse blanket from the tack room and tucked it around him. She checked his hands again, still cold, but color returning. She couldn't leave him. Not like this. So she fetched water in a tin cup, warmed it over a flame, and trickled it against his lips. He stirred, murmuring low. She couldn't make out the words, but they didn't sound like fear. She whispered, "You're safe here," before she even realized she was speaking. The sky lightened through the slats in the barn walls. She had only minutes before her father came out to inspect the stock. He always started with the barn. He'd see Micah, and he wouldn't ask questions. He'd call the sheriff, or worse. She touched Micah's shoulder. "You need to wake." He blinked slowly, eyes gray as slate under thawing lashes. His voice rasped. "I didn't mean to trespass. You're freezing." Was warmer than the wind. His head lolled back down. Lena's hand hovered near his cheek, unsure whether to help or retreat. In the end, she left him where he lay, covered him better, and moved quickly to finish the chores before her father noticed anything out of place. By the time she entered the kitchen again, her father was at the table, buttering stale bread with the focus of a man used to hunger. He didn't look up. "Feed's low," she said. "Need to go into town come Tuesday." He grunted. "I'll take the wagon." He didn't argue. He hadn't in months. Whatever dreams he once had of shielding her from hardship had died the same day her wedding was called off. The banker's son who promised her a soft life in Billings changed his mind when he saw her driving cattle one spring morning, dust on her dress and sweat at her brow. He wanted lace, not leather. Her father never spoke of it again, but the lines on his face deepened, as if her rejection had stained his pride too. That night, she snuck food to the barn. Micah sat upright now, his coat tight around his ribs, steam rising from the soup she handed him. He thanked her with a nod, said little, but his eyes followed her with quiet recognition. She noticed the way he moved, like a man taught to take up less space than he needs. The way he chewed slow, as if savoring something rare. And when she asked, gently, what happened, he didn't launch into a tale. Just said, "The bride changed her mind. The letter never reached her. Or maybe it did." He wasn't bitter. Not exactly. More tired than anything. "I walked a while," he said. "Figured I'd find work somewhere. Guess I found your barn instead." "It's not mine," she said. "Not really." He looked around. "Feels like someone's kept it alive." She didn't answer. Just pulled her coat tighter and sat across from him on the hay, both listening to the wind rattle the doors. By the third day, he was splitting logs without being asked, fixing the broken hinge on the chicken coop, saying little, but always watching with soft, assessing eyes. Her father noticed. "Who's the man with the dog eyes?" he asked, half joking, half wary. "Just someone cold," Lena said. "I let him stay a night or two." "He planning to leave?" She looked out the window, where Micah stood elbow-deep in water, cleaning the trough. "Don't think he's planning much at all. He just helps." Her father grunted again. Less like disapproval this time, more like resignation. By the seventh day, Micah had moved from the barn to the small bunkhouse behind the stables. Lena hadn't offered, it had simply happened, the way snow melts when touched by enough kindness. He made no claim to belonging, didn't overstep, didn't charm. He just stayed, steady as sunrise. And that was the strangest part of all. Lena had known men who tried to win her like a game of cards. Others who scorned her for not being soft enough. But Micah asked nothing. He accepted silence like it was sacred. He noticed her without needing to say it. One night, she found him reading the letter again, creases deep from folding. He didn't see her watching. The wind outside had stilled. The stove glowed low. And in that stillness, something settled in Lena's chest that felt not like fear, but like the beginning of warmth. She stepped back from the doorway and left him to his memories. But as she lay in bed, she whispered his name into the dark, just to hear it soften on her tongue. Micah. A man who came without promise. Who stayed without pride. Who looked at her, not like a girl left behind, but like a woman waiting to be seen. The snow thickened outside, wrapping the ranch in silence once more. But this silence felt different now. Not the silence of absence. The silence of something beginning. The days passed in a hush of frost and old routines. Lena rose before dawn, fed the horses, hauled the kindling, salted the path between house and barn, all while the wind pressed against the world like a hand trying to wipe it clean. The only new thing, quiet, steady, and unspoken, was the man who moved through her father's land like a breath too light to stir dust. Micah did not ask to stay. He never once pleaded, bargained, or made mention of what he might deserve. He simply woke, stood, and began to mend what was broken. Without waiting for permission. He repaired the crooked fence behind the north pasture, the one the cattle always leaned on. Replaced the rusted nails with ones he'd straightened by the forge. When a hinge squealed on the feed-room door, he oiled it without fanfare. His hands, thick-knuckled and red from cold, worked like he owed the land something. Lena watched from the shadows more often than she admitted. She wasn't used to men who moved like they belonged but never claimed. Who could split wood with quiet grace, then wash the dinner bowls like it meant something. Each evening, she brought him stew or whatever scraps she could sneak from her father's plate. He never asked for more. He always waited until she'd handed it over before he touched the bowl, as if to accept her help too eagerly would cheapen it. "I'll work," he said one evening, voice hushed under the stars. "You don't owe me a thing, but I'll keep earning the nothing I've got." That made her blink. He didn't smile, didn't explain. Just tucked into the stew like a man who knew better than to take warmth for granted. Her father, Caleb Kincaid, wasn't blind. He noticed the man working the land. He noticed his daughter watching. But he said little. That was his way. Words were things to be rationed, like coffee or bullets. He simply frowned deeper, shook his head when Micah passed too near the porch, and drank his evening coffee in brittle silence. By the 7th day, the bunkhouse had been swept clean. By the 9th, Micah was sleeping there with a wool blanket Lena had left on the cot, pretending it was Granny Myrtle's doing. "Kind of her," Micah had said, folding the edge of the quilt beneath his calloused fingers. "She's always dropping things off," Lena replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Used to say loneliness is a curse best broken in pairs." Micah only nodded, as though the truth in that wasn't meant to be touched too hard. Each night, Lena returned to the house with her cheeks flushed from more than cold. She found herself moving slower through chores, choosing paths that led her near the bunkhouse, just to see the light in his window. He never called out to her, never asked her to stay, but she could feel the way his gaze lingered when she turned away, like he was memorizing her without trespass. One morning, as the sun cracked through the clouds in pink seams, Lena found her father waiting on the porch. He had his coat buttoned all the way up, hands tucked into his sides like he was bracing for something. "This man," he said, not looking at her. "You're doing—" "He was freezing," she said. "That don't answer my question. I fed him. Let him stay." He turned then, his face carved hard by wind and years of sorrow. "What are you looking for in a man like that?" "I'm not looking," she said. "He's just here." Caleb snorted. "Folks don't just show up. They come with plans, with wants. Mark me, he's hiding something." Lena bristled. "Or maybe he's just tired. Same as us." Her father narrowed his eyes, studying her like a stranger who spoke a language he didn't want to learn. Then he turned and walked inside. Lena stood on the porch a long while, hands clenched in her sleeves. When she turned, she saw Micah down by the woodpile, splitting logs with a calm rhythm that didn't break even once during their conversation. Later that day, she joined him near the smokehouse. They worked in silence, passing cuts of meat to hang and salt. "You always work this hard?" she asked. He shrugged. "Don't know how to stop." She didn't smile, but her voice softened. "That letter, your bride never answered." He paused. "Not from pain, but consideration." "No. And I don't blame her. I'm not what you call promising. A carpenter without a shop. No land. No fine speech. Just motion. You came anyway." He nodded. "Didn't feel right to stop. Somewhere between Indiana and here, it stopped being about the woman and started being about the journey." "That sounds like something a preacher might say." He gave the smallest grin. "Maybe I'm just making sense of a fool's errand." They went back to their work. But the air between them felt different now. Not charged, something gentler. Like a bridge half-built. That night, a storm rolled in sudden and sharp, slamming branches against the roof and sending the cattle into uneasy moans. Lena rushed outside, coat flapping behind her like a flag. Micah met her halfway between barn and porch, lantern in hand. "I'll check the east gate," he said. "I'll get the foal," she replied without pause. They didn't argue. Didn't hesitate. They moved like two people who'd been doing this a long time, even if this was their first real test. Snow slashed sideways. Wind howled down from the hills. Lena found the foal shivering in the corner, legs trembling. She lifted it with a grunt, muscles straining, arms burning. When she staggered toward the barn, the wind nearly took her down. But then Micah was there, coat soaked, eyes wild. He took the foal from her arms without a word, cradled it like something holy, and carried it into the warm straw without stumbling once. She followed him in, breathless. He laid the animal down, covered it in burlap, then turned to her. Snow clung to his lashes. "You all right?" he asked. "I'm not glass," she said, though her knees shook. He reached out, slow, uncertain, and brushed a stray curl from her face. "No, you're not." They stood that way for a breath too long. She could hear her own heart, could see her own reflection in the shine of his eyes. Then she stepped back. The moment passed, but it left something behind. 2 nights later, Granny Myrtle arrived, bundled in wool and perfume that clung like violets. "Came to bring quilt scraps," she said, then eyed Lena over her spectacles. "And to see what kind of handsome mystery man the snow delivered." Micah shook her hand, warm and respectful. Granny smirked. "He's a quiet one," she muttered to Lena when he turned away. "Quiet's dangerous." "Dangerous how?" "Because it's the quiet ones you tell your secrets to." Lena didn't reply, just watched Micah kneel by the stove, coaxing flame from damp wood. That night, the ranch slept heavier. The air had softened, as if the land itself knew something had shifted. Lena lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind die down. She thought of Micah's hands. Not how they touched, but how they held. The way he lifted things gently even when they were heavy. The way he looked at her, not like a man who saw a future, but like one who saw her. Whole, strong, enough. And that, more than charm or promises, was what made her breath catch. Not that he stayed, but that he never once asked to. The snow had crusted so hard that it cracked beneath each step like bone. January had carved the land hollow, stripping bark from trees and kindness from breath. Every movement required more effort now, horses stiff in the morning, hinges groaning at touch, and Lena's own hands blistered from carrying too many buckets with frozen rope handles. The cold didn't ask permission. It simply entered your bones and stayed. Micah hadn't said much that week, but then again, neither had she. Words, she found, were like firewood, precious, and best saved for the bitterest nights. Still, he was there at every turn. Chopping, hauling, fixing. He moved with quiet purpose, as if repaying a debt no one had asked him to settle. He never crossed lines, never assumed, but his presence had begun to wear a path in her heart, just like his boots had worn one in the snow between bunkhouse and barn. Her father noticed. He didn't need to say so. The silence between them had grown taut, brittle. He'd set his coffee cup down a little harder each morning, his gaze tracking Micah from under the brim of his hat. And Lena, she felt the divide rising like a fence that hadn't been there before. Then came the fire. It began with a single spark, nothing more than a clumsy flick of a lantern as Lena reached for the saddle soap. One moment the barn was still, warm with straw-scented air and the rustle of resting horses. The next, flames danced up the wooden post like fingers looking for something to hold. She shouted, tried to smother it with burlap. But the wind outside had found a crack, fed the flame greedily. It raced along the beam and leapt to the roof as if starved. She ran. Not for the house, but for the bunkhouse. Micah burst out before she even reached the door. His coat barely on, boots unlaced, axe in hand. He didn't ask where. He just ran past her, into the glow. The barn was ablaze in 2 corners, smoke thick as wool. Micah pulled open stalls with his coat sleeve over his mouth. The horses bolted into the cold, wild-eyed and steaming. Lena followed, coughing, dragging hay bales back, kicking open the rear doors. 1 stall remained, the mare with her newborn foal, trembling in the far corner. Micah didn't hesitate. He dropped the axe, vaulted the stall gate, and lifted the foal in his arms like it weighed nothing. The mare followed, whinnying low and frightened, but he moved slow enough not to spook her. The smoke thickened. Flames licked the rafters. Lena's voice broke. "Micah!" He stumbled through the smoke a moment later, eyes red-rimmed, hair singed at the edges, the foal pressed to his chest. He didn't speak. Just walked past her, set the creature gently on the snow, and collapsed to his knees beside it. She dropped beside him. His hands were blistered. The left side of his coat was burned through. The night howled around them. She touched his face. "You should have waited. You didn't." Those words settled into her like hot tea into chilled bones. They didn't return to the house. Not yet. They sat beside the foal until the wind died, until the smoke faded into the black sky and the barn stood scorched but intact. The fire hadn't taken much, but it had nearly taken everything. They moved to the bunkhouse at last, both silent. She fetched ointment and rags. He sat on the cot, elbows on knees, letting her tend his hands. He winced only once. "You're lucky," she said. "No worse than a scald. Feels like worse." She smiled, brief and small. "You saved her. Didn't think about it. Just moved. That's how you are, isn't it? You just move." He looked up then, and something in his face had changed, softened, sharpened, maybe both. "I move," he said. "But I've never stayed. Not once." She sat back on her heels. "Why not? No one ever gave me a reason to." Lena stood slowly. The bunkhouse seemed smaller suddenly, as if her breath took up more space than before. The oil lamp flickered low on the shelf. The storm had gone still outside, the kind of hush that came before sunrise. Her voice was quiet. "What if someone did?" He didn't answer. She crossed to the stove, stoked the coals. Her hands trembled, but she held them steady. There had never been a moment like this, not with the banker's son, not with any of the ranch hands who'd passed through. This was no proposal. This was no dream spun by letters or lace. It was survival, wrapped in a kind of sacred knowing. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "But I need you to know something." He turned toward her. She met his gaze and held it. "You make this place feel like it can breathe again." Micah rose. Slow. Measured. His hands, wrapped now, hung at his sides like anchors. He crossed the room in 4 steps and stopped just short of touching her. "I don't know what I am," he said. "But I know how to stay." Outside, a faint gold line had begun to etch the horizon. "I ain't got family," he added. "Ain't got land. Just these hands and what I've learned. I've never had someone choose me without a reason," she whispered. "Not because they had to. Not because they wanted something." He reached into his coat pocket and drew out a folded slip of paper. The letter. The one meant for a woman who had never written back. He offered it to her. "Burn it." She didn't take it right away. Her fingers hesitated. Then she reached out and closed them around the parchment. She crossed to the stove, opened the firebox, and laid the letter atop the embers. It curled in silence. The edges darkened. The ink bled and vanished. When she turned back, he was still standing, hands open. And she said it, simply. "Marry me." He blinked. "Lena." "Not for romance. Not yet. For something steadier. Something that won't break in winter." Micah stepped closer. He didn't ask if she meant it. Didn't test her resolve. "I'll marry you," he said. "But only if you promise me one thing." She nodded. "Anything. That if I stay, really stay, you'll let me be more than what this land needs." Her throat tightened. "I want you to be whatever you are. Even if I don't understand it yet." He breathed in like a man stepping out into clean air. Then he touched her hand, wrapped in his bandaged one. "Then yes," he said. "Before the sun." Granny Myrtle arrived half an hour later, wrapped in quilts and indignation, muttering about freezing her rear off for lovebirds who didn't know enough to wait till spring. But when she saw their faces, smoke-smeared, wind-bitten, lit from within, she stopped talking. They stood in the clearing near the frozen stream. The sky had begun to bleed lavender and gold. Trees cast long shadows over the snow. The air held that peculiar hush, like the whole world leaned in to listen. Granny held a Bible with cracked leather. Read the words slow and sure. She called them husband and wife before the frost melted on their boots. Lena had no ring. Micah had no vows written. But their eyes never strayed. And that was enough. The fire in the barn had died. The ranch slept. Her father hadn't come out. Not yet. But she imagined he knew. Imagined the crunch of her boots in the snow had told him everything. They didn't wait for approval. Love, she had learned, didn't always come with blessings. Sometimes it came in smoke and silence. Sometimes it came with burnt hands and winter breath. After the words were spoken, Micah bent his head, not to kiss her, but to press his forehead to hers. A moment of stillness, of promise. They walked back to the bunkhouse side by side, their footprints side by side, their shadows stretching long behind them like twin roots just beginning to reach into soil. As they crossed the yard, the front door of the main house creaked open. Her father stepped out. Hat pulled low, hands in his coat. He didn't speak, just looked at them, long and heavy. Micah stopped. Lena did not. She met her father's eyes and nodded. Not a plea, not a dare, just truth. Her father's gaze drifted to the smokehouse, then to the barn, still scarred but standing. His eyes landed on Micah. He didn't reach for his gun, didn't spit. He said one word. Boy. Micah lifted his chin. Sir. Her father held his gaze a moment longer, then turned and walked back inside. The door shut behind him. That was all. But it was enough. That night, as the stars rose hard and bright above the plains, Lena and Micah sat in the doorway of the bunkhouse, their shoulders touching. He held her hand like it was already familiar. She leaned into him, not from weariness, but from choice. They didn't speak. Words had done their work. Now came the part where life had to catch up. She rested her head on his shoulder and listened to the wind sigh through the grass, softer now, as if winter had loosened its grip for just a while. The fire had taken something, but in its ashes they had laid a vow. Before dawn, with nothing but frost and firelight for witness, they had chosen to stay. The morning after the vow tasted like iron and frost. It lay heavy in the air, still and cold, the way breath curls in silence before breaking into speech. Lena awoke not to celebration but to stillness. Her hand, bare and ringless, lay over Micah's chest as he breathed slow beneath the quilt. She watched the rise and fall of him and wondered if marriage always began in such quiet. Not with bells, but with bone-deep steadiness. Micah stirred beneath her touch and offered a small, tired smile. His burned hands, wrapped now in strips of linen and softened with salve, curled gently around hers. I dreamed we were building something, he murmured. We are, she said, voice rough with sleep. But first comes the reckoning. He sat up slowly, wincing slightly, and glanced toward the bunkhouse door. She knew the unspoken thought between them. Her father hadn't said a word after watching their footsteps disappear into the snow. But silence was its own storm, and Lena had lived long enough in its shadow to know how sharp it could break when it finally came. By the time the sun touched the hills with gold, her father was already saddled and walking the pasture fence line like he always did after a long night. A ritual, maybe, or a way to burn off the thoughts too heavy to carry into the house. Lena found him at the southern edge of the property, where the snow thinned to dry grass and wind etched the earth into hard ridges. He didn't turn when she approached. I'm married, she said simply. I know. His voice held no tremble. It was flat as hammered tin. He didn't take anything, she added. I gave it. All of it. Freely. Caleb Kincaid stood with his arms crossed, gloved hands digging into his sleeves. You think I care about virtue? I think you care about control. That made him turn. The look he gave her wasn't one of anger. It was worse, raw disappointment, laced with something deeper. Fear, maybe. Loss. You think I don't know what you are? He asked. You think I don't see you? I've seen you work yourself into the ground for this land. I've seen every damn man pass you by, 'Cause you're too strong to need him. And now you marry a drifter with nothing but burned hands and quiet eyes, and I'm supposed to just, bless it. Lena held her ground, though her throat ached. You haven't blessed anything in a long time. He stared at her, breathing hard. You think I don't love you, is that it? I think you forgot how. That landed like a blow. He looked away. For a long time, neither of them moved. Then Caleb spoke again, voice lower. You know what I see when I look at you? Your mother. That stubborn chin, those hard eyes. And I see the day I buried her in snow just like this. You were screaming in your cradle, and I held you and thought, God took one and left me the other. I don't know what to do with that. Lena's breath caught. I loved her so much, he said. And I was afraid I'd lose you too. So I held on too tight. I made everything about survival. Not joy. Not softness. You shut me out, she whispered. I thought it'd keep you safe. It didn't. A bird passed overhead, its wings catching the early light. Neither of them looked up. I didn't marry him to spite you, she said after a while. I married him because for the first time, someone looked at me like I wasn't just the sum of what I could carry or fix. He saw me, and I didn't have to earn it. Caleb let out a breath like it had been held for years. You love him. I trust him. Maybe that's more important right now. He rubbed a hand across his weathered face. I don't know how to let go. You don't have to let go, she said softly. Just make room. The sun cleared the hills. Light spilled across the land, painting the snow in gold. Caleb turned toward the barn, then toward the house, as if choosing between the past and the future. He said nothing more. Just walked away, toward the house, his steps slow, his shoulders no longer quite so stiff. Lena watched him until he disappeared inside. Later, she found Micah stacking what was left of the unburned firewood. The bandages on his hands were smudged, his brow damp with sweat. She moved to his side, took the log from his grasp, and set it down herself. He doesn't hate you, she said. Micah gave a quiet snort. Feels like he does. He's not used to things changing without his say-so. Micah turned to face her. And you? I've been waiting for change since I learned to ride. He studied her, then leaned forward and pressed his forehead against hers again, just like he had on their wedding morning. It wasn't passion that moved them, it was presence. The shared knowing of two people who'd walked through fire and come out scarred, not broken. The day stretched long, filled with chores and sidelong glances. Granny Myrtle came by just before dusk, a kettle of soup in one hand and a box in the other. What's this? Lena asked. Your mother's things, Myrtle said. Been holding on to them for years. Figured now's the right time. Inside the box, a quilt, soft and faded. A brooch in the shape of a sparrow. A letter never finished. And a wedding dress wrapped in tissue yellowed with age. Lena touched it like one might touch memory, carefully, reverently. She would have wanted you to wear it, Myrtle said. I didn't have a church or music, Lena whispered. You had firelight, and a man who would have burned with you. That night, Lena laid the dress across the bed in the bunkhouse. Micah stood at the doorway, watching her. She was beautiful, he said. So was her silence, Lena replied. I think I learned it from her. Micah stepped forward, brushed his fingers across the fabric, then across her arm. We'll fill this place with noise, he promised. With laughter. With hammering. With new stories. Lena turned to him. And if the stories end hard, we build new ones. As the stars lit the sky once more, Lena stepped outside. Snow drifted lazily, no longer cruel. The barn stood dark but not ruined. The house glowed from within, faint light spilling through the windows like an invitation long withheld. She heard footsteps behind her. Her father emerged from the shadows, carrying a small wooden box. He held it out without ceremony. She took it, opened the lid. Inside lay a folded deed. and beneath it, a silver ring that hadn't seen daylight in 2 decades. "It was hers," Caleb said. "And now it's yours. For whatever comes next." Lena's throat closed. She reached forward, not just for the box, but for his hand. He didn't pull away. Micah stepped out to join them, quiet as ever. Caleb's eyes met his. There was no warmth in them, but there was something close. "You stay?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Micah said. "And you mean to do right by her?" "I already am." A long breath. A slow nod. Then Caleb turned and walked back inside, leaving the door open behind him. Not a welcome, but not a wall. Lena looked at Micah. "That's as close as we'll get." Micah smiled. "Close is enough for now." They stood beneath the stars, 2 figures carved in frost and firelight. No grand promises. No declarations. Just presence. Just promise made real. The reckoning had come. Not in shouts, but in quiet confessions. In the laying down of pride. In the lifting of old grief. And as the wind softened and the land sighed into sleep, Lena felt something stir inside her chest. Not hope, not exactly. Something sturdier. Something that would hold through the storms still to come. The thaw crept in slow, like a prayer whispered by the earth itself. First came the sound, the trickle of water running beneath snowpack, the slow drip of ice slipping from eaves, the soft thud of boots no longer crunching but sinking into thawed mud. Then the scent, damp wood, fresh earth, smoke from a stove that burned more for comfort than survival. Trees that had stood brittle and bare began to swell with promise. And with that promise, Lena found herself changing in ways she hadn't prepared for. The morning she noticed the shift in her body, it was not with fear but with a hush, an inward pause. She sat on the porch swing Micah had built 2 weeks prior, carved by hand, smoothed with care, and she pressed her palm to her belly where a new rhythm had begun. Quiet still, like a knock from the inside. A beginning. She said nothing at first, letting the knowledge bloom inside her like the earliest crocus in snow. Micah sensed it, though. He was like that, tuned to her silences, the shape of her breath. One evening, he came in from mending the gate, dirt smeared across his forearms, sunburnt at the collar. He crouched to unlace his boots, then looked up at her across the hearth. "You've been different," he said. She stirred the stew. "Have I?" "Not in a way that worries me. Just quieter, but more full. Like you're holding something." She looked at him. "Steady." Then set the ladle down. "I think I'm pregnant." Micah didn't move for a long breath. Then he stood, crossed the room in 3 long strides, and knelt in front of her, his hands resting on her knees. "You sure?" "No. But I know." He rested his forehead against her leg. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with awe, not fear. "I never thought I'd be part of something this real." Lena exhaled, her hand finding the curve of his shoulder. "Neither did I." In the days that followed, they worked with a new rhythm. Micah began to build a cradle from leftover wood, smoothing each corner like a sacred task. Lena planted herbs beside the porch, kneeling in damp soil, pressing life into the earth with the tips of her fingers. The ranch began to stretch again, like a bear waking from winter. Her father watched all this with the wary eye of a man who's seen storms bloom out of blue skies. He came to dinner now and then, said little but sat longer. He brought lumber one morning for Micah, gruffly muttering about fence repairs, though Micah had already built it twice over. Lena didn't press. Sometimes, a gift was shaped like a chore. And then came the day he gave her the quilt. It had been her mother's, a pattern of migrating geese stitched into sky-colored fabric. Caleb set it on the table without a word, then stepped out onto the porch, leaving the door swinging gently in his wake. Lena ran her fingers across the stitches. Some were neat, some jagged, like all the love that had raised her. That night, they laid the quilt on their bed, and Micah held her like she was still made of snow and needed guarding from melt. But it was Lena now who steadied him, who whispered, "We're here. We're rooted." Spring deepened. The ranch hummed. Chicks hatched. Cows birthed calves in tall grass. The foal Micah had saved now chased butterflies with legs too long for her body. And every evening, Lena wrote small notes in the old ledger by the kitchen window. Not about debts or feed costs, but about life. Micah's laugh, the way her father watched the porch swing when he thought she wasn't looking, the sudden craving for blackberries. But peace, Lena had learned, was not the same as stillness. One afternoon, she found Micah asleep in the barn, curled in the hay beside the unfinished cradle. The light fell across his face like honey, soft and golden. For a moment, she stood frozen, her hand resting against the doorframe, her heart catching. He looked just like he had that first morning, weathered, worn, mouth slightly parted, but this time he wasn't cold. He was home. And something about the image made her throat tighten. She stepped forward, careful not to wake him, and saw beside him a piece of carved wood, the headboard of the cradle, half finished, with her name etched into it in his quiet, deliberate hand. Lena. No flourish. No fuss. Just the truth of her, marked in grain. She sank beside him, and for a moment, the world was only breath and straw and the heartbeat of the child within her. Micah stirred, blinked sleepily, and smiled. Caught me. You build things even in your dreams? I build things so the dreams don't fall apart. She took his hand. I never thought I'd be part of someone's plans. You're not a part, he said. You're the reason. Later that evening, thunder began to roll in the distance. Low, slow, the kind that crawled along the horizon before showing its face. Lena stood on the porch, one hand on her stomach, the other resting on the railing. Micah joined her, a cup of warm tea in his hands, his eyes scanning the clouds. You feel that? He asked. Like something's coming. Storm. Change. Lightning flashed, far off. The wind picked up. Caleb appeared in the doorway behind them. You two better come inside. This one might be loud. It was. The rain came in sheets, slicing across the field, drumming against the roof with ancient rhythm. Lena stood at the window, watching it flood the yard, the troughs, the firewood stack. Micah came up behind her. It'll pass. She nodded. But something inside her coiled. Not fear. Anticipation. The next morning, the air was scrubbed clean. The sun rose bold and bright, and the ranch gleamed like it had been born again. Lena walked the land barefoot, letting the damp soil press into her soles. She passed the garden, the coop, the bunkhouse now used for storage. The barn stood open, sweet hay wafting out. She stepped inside, and paused. Her father stood there. He held the finished cradle in his hands. I added the last rail, he said. You left it out. She approached slowly. I didn't mean to. Wasn't a mistake, he said. You were waiting. She nodded. He set the cradle down, and they both stared at it. I didn't know how to be a father to a girl who didn't cry, he said. I thought strength meant silence. It doesn't, she replied. It means staying, even when silence hurts. He swallowed. I stayed for the land. I should have stayed for you. You still can. He looked at her belly, then into her eyes. You'll be better at this than I was. I learned by watching, she said, what not to do, and what still matters. Micah entered the barn then, saw them, and paused. Caleb straightened. For a breath, all three stood without speaking. Then Caleb stepped forward, extended his hand to Micah. Micah took it. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Later that day, Lena moved the cradle into the house. She set it beside the window where the breeze brought the scent of wild sage and pine. She laid the quilt in it, smoothed the edges, and sat back with her hand over her belly. Outside, Micah hammered the final rail on the front gate. Her father worked the east field. The foal galloped in loose circles near the fence, and Granny Myrtle's laughter drifted down the road as she scolded her mule for lagging. Everything was ordinary, and somehow that made it holy. That night, Lena sat on the porch swing with Micah beside her, the stars burning above like scattered prayers. Do you think we'll be enough? She asked. We already are. She leaned her head on his shoulder. What if it gets hard again? Then we remember this. This. He gestured to the field, the stars, the quiet inside them. This peace. This root. This promise we didn't have to fight for because we built it together. She smiled, small and certain. Micah looked at her. You saved me, Lena. You were never lost, she said. Just waiting to be found in the right place. They sat long after the lanterns dimmed. And when the wind stirred the grass, soft and green again, it whispered through the land like a hymn. Spring had come while they slept. But they were awake now. Alive. And they were not afraid.